This is James Taylor, and you're listening to The Creative Life. The Creative Life podcast is a show created for you, the creative. If you're looking for inspiration, motivation, and advice while at home, at work, or on your daily commute, then this show is for you. Each episode brings you a successful creative, whether that's a musician, writer, artist, designer, performer, educator, or creative entrepreneur. They share their journey, their successes, their failures, their creative process, their insights, and much, much more. In this episode, I speak with Nick Skillicorn, and we talk about what individuals and companies can do to improve their creativity and turbocharge their innovation efforts. We also discuss his new business, Idea to Value. We look at jazz, improvisation, and creativity, and the Holland sandwich experience. Enjoy this episode. Hey, it's James Taylor here. I'm delighted today to have Nick Skillicorn. Nick helps individuals and companies improve their creativity and turbocharge their innovation efforts so they can finally deliver on the value and ideas they've been struggling to execute. He's the CEO of Improvides Innovation Consulting, the chief editor and founder of IdeaToValue.com, and an author and TEDx speaker, and has already helped thousands of entrepreneurs grow their innovation capabilities through his unique insights into recent scientific findings on how creativity works and what it takes for ideas to succeed. And it's my great pleasure to have Nick on the show today. Welcome to the show, Nick.
Hello, James. Nice to be here.
So share with our guests, I've given a little bit about you there, but what's going on in your world just now?
Quite a bit. So, as you mentioned, I'm a creativity and innovation consultant. So my focus is predominantly on helping companies and individuals find out how creativity actually works, how ideas therefore work, but more importantly than that, how to actually get them to work for that company. So I spent a lot of last year doing consulting work, predominantly in the UK and Italy. And then this year, I've been focusing on building up IdeaToValue.com, which is a platform for not just myself, but any expert out there on innovation and creativity to help spread their ideas and message around how to help improve performance on those subjects. So I've been a very busy bunny.
Absolutely. Take us back. I mean, where did you first learn your craft from a consulting perspective, and then where did the kind of creativity and the innovation part come in?
Well, like many people, I work in London, and I've been here for more than 11 years now. And I started out just after university joining a graduate scheme at one of the big four consulting firms. So it was Deloitte. And I moved into the part of management consulting which deals with program management. So if anyone has ever had someone come in and do project planning or risk and issue analysis, essentially anything to keep long-term two-year projects on track, that's the sort of work that I was doing. And while it was very fulfilling, and I learned an incredible amount about how businesses work and how to improve performance, I always had this slight frustration about just keeping businesses managing their status quo. I always felt like I could contribute a bit more if I was actually helping them push forward slightly into the unknown, which is where consultancies struggle quite a bit. In addition to that, I actually also have a background in improvised theatre, specifically improvised comedy, and it's always been more of a hobby of mine. I've never wanted to pursue it professionally, but it's something that I've taught throughout university, a bit after university, and it's only when I got into my full-time career that the hobby started taking a bit of a back seat, which anyone who has a sort of creative hobby knows the frustration that comes with having to choose time between career and your passion. So I always thought, what if there's a way to help companies improve their growth prospects, but using what I know about spontaneity and idea generation and my interest behind how that actually works to help them achieve that? So it was just a bit more than 3 years ago that I decided, you know what, I've had a good run in consulting, but I'm going to choose to start my own company now. And that's when I started Improvides Consulting, focused on finding out ways to actually help individuals and companies achieve innovation with some evidence behind it. And that's been the challenge, but also the big breakthrough for me, to actually be able to talk about why things happen, why ideas are generated, what triggers them, but also what prevents them, which is especially interesting for individuals and especially useful for big consulting clients.
And you mentioned having done this consulting work in the past as well. So when people kind of come up to you now and you have these different kind of labels associated with it, like a blogger and consultant and speaker, which one do you naturally gravitate to talking about first? How do you kind of define yourself from you lead on one thing, or is it basically just it's a mixture of different things you're doing?
If it depends slightly on the audience. In general, I'll say I'm a creativity first and then innovation consultant. So my emphasis is really on helping individuals find out about the big ephemeral questions around why they get ideas at certain times and not when they want to get them in brainstorming sessions. But the way I'll talk to people will, of course, change slightly depending on who the audience is. Some people in senior management gravitate a lot more to innovation experts than they would to creativity experts. But in general, I talk about how I help make ideas happen for whatever that may mean for you and your company.
And that difference between innovation and creativity, can you talk a little bit about that? Because sometimes we hear that within creativity, that word creativity sounds a little bit touchy-feely, especially within large organizations, and they might steer away from, because it doesn't sound very quantitative in that way.
You've really struck the nail on the head there. I mean, it's something that a lot of big companies struggle with. A lot of them see innovation as a core value for their companies, but in the same way that they see these other like magical words like quality and service and all these other positive ideas as being something in their company without actually knowing what it means. I wrote an article, I think it was back in March, where I really wanted to get down to the crux of what people think about when they talk about innovation, because I've got my view. To me, innovation is about turning an idea into a solution that delivers value, specifically to the customer. But I knew that a lot of the other people talking about innovation out there had very different views. And when I got together 15 of the world's top innovation writers and asked them what their view was, I got 15 very different definitions. And it just shows that even amongst the expert community, people who talk about this for a living, there's a lot of real difference between what people mean when they talk about innovation. And the same goes with creativity. For individuals, creativity might feel like one thing. And specifically, a lot of people relate creativity to the art world, being able to produce artistic things like music and dance routines and visual arts like sculpture and paintings. But creativity isn't just about art. And I think that's what scares a lot of people in the business world talking about creativity. As you say, it seems a bit personal and ephemeral. Whereas in reality, creativity, by its definition of what's been going on in the scientific community, has been the academic world has decided that creativity is anything where you're generating something that's both new and valuable. So it doesn't need to be music. It doesn't need to be a painting. It can be a mathematical formula. It can be a new piece of code. It can be a new design for something. It can be a new business model. Anything that hasn't existed before and is also useful counts as creativity.
And then on your TEDx talk, I've seen as well in some of your other writing, you bring a lot into it about the science and the neuroscience of creativity as well. So that particular journey for you to kind of go in there, because you're not trained as a scientist, I believe. So how did you kind of start to dive into the neuroscience of creativity and innovation?
I'm definitely not your general academic. The closest I got to a scientific background was when I was doing my degree in geography back at university, and I was analyzing soil samples down microscopes. But yeah, no, I'm definitely I'm someone with a keen interest in the scientific endeavor and the evidence that it brings. But I prefer to look across the entire range of what other people are studying and act as sort of a hub of knowledge, because I've always had this scientific mindset. So I like, as I said, going through the whys of why things happen, what certain research is telling us, and at the same time trying to figure out if there's conflicting research, what that means. So within the scientific community, there's a surprising amount of research going on now behind the neuroscience and psychology of how creativity works, and lots of different experiments from across the world. But unfortunately, they're not all giving us a consistent answer. there's some studies which completely contradict other studies around which parts of the brain get activated during certain activities. One scanner will say a brain region is becoming more active, another region will become less active. But that's why you need to have this view across the entire spectrum of what's going on out there. So I've always been a geeky sort of person, quite a nerd at school, and I guess right now as well still. And I've always had an interest in technology and the sciences. So I think that's what sort of attracted me to this evidence-based way that I like to look at creativity.
And let's talk about idea to value now, the website. So let's talk about your own creative process. So this is something kind of relatively new. Where did the idea come from? Was it something that you've been mulling around for a while? And how did you kind of go about kind of developing that initial idea?
So I've been blogging since I started Improvides at improvides.com, and it's been an excellent way for me to get noticed and get people talking to me. But it's always been representing just the views of myself. And there's lots of other platforms out there where people can write on the topic of innovation. Some really excellent ones that have existed for many years. But there was a problem that I started seeing in the network out there, which was these websites where people were just essentially dumping their blog posts for innovation were only really being read by other people writing on those websites. So there was hardly any sharing happening on the articles. There was hardly any engagement. There were no comments being posted. And what that made me notice is these ideas on creativity and innovation aren't actually going out there to the people who would benefit from them the most, the people who are struggling with creativity, the people who actually want to implement innovation in their own organizations. So the reason I started ideatovalue.com is as a platform for other experts out there on the topic. I don't just let anyone write on it. There's a writer's application process where I screen people through to make sure that they know what they're talking about and that the advice that they're giving out there is good for the readers. But the focus there is to actually give the authors the best platform that they can write on, where their name gets displayed as prominently as possible, links back to their website, a real lack of advertising, because the website platform doesn't rely on advertising for its business model. So there's not the focus on getting banner ads in front of the readers. And therefore, the combination of getting a smaller number of focused articles with higher quality content in front of the readers also makes the readers' experience that much better, in my view.
And then talk about making this switch from where probably a lot of our listeners who have either they're working a 9 to 5, they're working some job, maybe they enjoy that job, but they want to kind of branch out on their own. So you went through that journey yourself as well. Talk about that journey for you. What was initially holding you back from making that jump? And then, what were some of the things when you initially kind of went onto that journey? Talk what the actual process was like.
If only I could say it was all fun and dandy and daisies and sugar-coated lollipops. It was a tough process because, as I said, my background was in program management consulting. It's probably one step up from accounting as far as the most process-driven type of work that you can imagine. And I mean, I was earning very good money there. Life was very comfortable. There was good promotion prospects, but at the same time, I was just feeling a bit like I wasn't achieving the ambition that I had for myself. I wanted to prove to myself that I could create something larger and actually have more of an impact on people. The challenge that I had is I wanted to do this in an industry where I wasn't necessarily very well known. So when I left the world of consulting, moving as a small cog from a large organization out there, essentially a small fish in a big pond, trying to become a fish in an even bigger pond, which is the world out there where nobody knows your name, was quite challenging. The first year, more or less, no one knew who I was, and I had to promote myself through writing, through writing my first book, 30 Days of Creativity training, getting my message out there in any way that I could. It was very frustrating, and it was also very disheartening at some times. There was time periods where you just feel like your message is getting completely lost out there. No one knows who you are. No one is listening to you. And it can become very disheartening. And it was only after I got through the first year where more or less it felt like nothing was happening that all of a sudden you start noticing people coming to you and saying, "Hey, Nick, I've read this. I like your insight on that. Can you come and talk to us?" Or, "Hey, Nick, there's an opportunity for a TED talk, a TEDx talk at your old university. Would you like to come and be one of the speakers?" And that's when you start noticing it takes time to get through the difficult first couple of months to actually not only prove to other people that you know what you're talking about, but also to prove to yourself that you've got what it takes to stick with it. There's a lot of times when, especially when you start up your own company and you're not feeling the traction, there's that question in the back of your mind that it would just be so much easier to go back to the 9 to 5 where I know I'm going to get a paycheck at the end of the month. And yeah, I mean, I might not be as happy as I could ever be, but surely it must be better than this. But you have to stick through those time periods.
And then in that process you went through, who were the either the mentors or who were the role models that you really looked to? You could say, okay, I can. Someone has either forged this path, either in your specific area or in maybe more generally has made that transition. But any kind of role models that you look to?
It was a bit of a tricky sort of situation for me from that respect, because I didn't really know anyone else who'd gone from the professional services world into a completely different industry and succeeded. Especially not people from my peer group or people before myself. You always hear these stories about a banker who goes and starts a vineyard, or who goes and wants to write the great American novel. Quite often these people are the ones who've come from a very lucrative, successful business and have a big amount of money saved up that allows them to take off time and essentially become a professional artist without relying on the income that requires. So the people who were supporting me and that I looked up to during my transition, definitely my parents. They were very supportive in my endeavor. They always wanted to make sure that I was asking the right questions about what I need to do to make it succeed, shoulder to cry on when things weren't necessarily going that well, and my close friends as well. And then I did know in the online community that there were people who were eventually, after refining their product and refining their message, making money doing what they loved. So I knew it was possible. It was just about learning the way that you need to market yourself, the way that you need to get your message in front of the right people. And it's going to sound a bit weird, but the main person who kept me going was the voice in the back of my head saying, "You're not going to quit on this. You're going to work that extra bit harder to actually just make it happen." So rather than trying to emulate someone else's success, I was trying to create my own success.
And then now, as things have really started to kind of get momentum, you get things are moving as well. Who are you finding that is getting the most value? What kind of clients are getting the most value? Is it that individual entrepreneur, or is it maybe someone that's maybe more an artist and they're working in traditional kind of creative industries, or is it those kind of companies that are looking for someone to really help them with their innovation and creativity?
All of the ones you just mentioned are ones that I've worked with and talked to, but the ones who seem to relate to my message the most and that I interact with the most are the startups who aren't right at the beginning of their process, but who are sort of trying to grow in a new way. So in general, they're still focused on executing ideas and generating ideas, but they know that maybe now it's time to get other people's viewpoints on challenges that they're facing to help them grow in a new direction. In general, if you talk about innovation, the companies on the larger scale, yes, they know innovation is important, but they want innovation in a risk-free way in general. And what that leads them to do is to look for the experts that they work with generally. They go back to the Big Four consulting clients. They go back to the Tony Robbinses of the world. They go back to the TV stars who talk about entrepreneurship, like the guys on Dragon's Den or Richard Branson. And they look for the big keynote speakers to try and come and fix their problems in a 1-hour talk, rather than thinking what's actually going to be required to change behavior, what's going to be required to change resource allocation. So I haven't cracked that market yet, but it's definitely on my agenda.
And on this fascinating journey that you've had, making this transition as well, can you tell us about a time, either in the previous work that you did or the stuff that you've been doing now, when there's maybe a project or something that you've been working on, you've given it your heart and your soul, but for whatever reason that project just hasn't quite worked out like you'd hoped? And more importantly, what were the lessons that you took away from that experience?
Absolutely. I mean, everyone who's gone through this sort of journey will have experienced this, whether or not they want to admit it. But a good example of that was when I was first starting out, probably a couple of months into starting Improvides. I'd gathered this huge mountain of research on how creativity works, which, looking back in hindsight, was just a little hill compared to the amount that I've gathered in the intervening years. But I thought, I'm the cat's pajamas. I know stuff that no one else knows, and I want to get my message out there and charge people to hear it. So I organized my first webinar, probably, let's say, about 5 months after starting, to let people know about this amazing opportunity for me to teach them about creativity and to teach them about innovation. And it was all set up. I had my marketing funnel out there. I was driving traffic to it. I was getting people signed up for it. And then when I actually came to launch the webinar, there was 2 people attending it. I mean, 2 people out of several hundred who'd signed up to, they said they wanted to listen to me talk, but obviously they had better things to do when the time actually came. And when I looked at those stats, my heart just sank. You're doing all this work and you're producing stuff that you know is really high quality, but you're just feeling like people out there aren't listening. And yeah, I mean, that really shook me quite a lot. But what it then led to is me asking myself, what is it about the way that I'm talking to these people out there on the internet and in person that's not necessarily making them want to learn more? And so what I learned from that experience, it was less about me talking about, me suggesting, hey, come listen to me talk about this webinar. I'm going to tell you about what's amazing about creativity. And my message instead started shifting towards, this is about you. This is about you, the individual. This is about you, the audience. I want to talk about helping you and you learning about why things happen to yourself. Why do you have ideas in the shower rather than during brainstorming sessions? Why do you sometimes struggle to convince your boss to give you time off from your regular project to focus on an innovative new idea? And that's when the ephemeral light bulb switch moment happened, where things started to change. It's all about providing value to the other people rather than you talking about how great you are yourself.
That's a great insight there. And I can imagine it must have been really disheartening initially when you've obviously prepared all that time for this webinar, and then you kind of initially going to get that result. But the fact that you took that experience and kind of learned from it and kind of tweaked actually what your kind of message and how you were communicating, that really says a lot. So that's awesome. On this journey as well, have there been any kind of, you talk about insights a lot and light bulb moments and those kind of eureka moments. What for you have been the kind of a key insight or light bulb moment?
Oh, there's been quite a few. And if you don't mind, if I could get a bit on the scientific side. Absolutely. Now, these sorts of insights are the ones that I think really help people the most when I'm talking during either speeches or people get back to me after online videos that I post. So one of the first ones is there's a study about twins, identical twins and fraternal twins, measuring their creativity levels. And I think it was about 117 pairs of twins had their creativity measured. And what this was looking for is identical twins obviously have the same genetic makeup. Fraternal twins have different genetic makeup. What is the genetic link between creativity levels? And when I'm talking about creativity levels and research, this is all based on what are now standard academic ways of assessing creativity. There's questionnaires you fill out, and then when the answers are marked, you can see how many different ideas are generated, how different the ideas are from each other, and how original they are in a large group of people. So there's quite a lot of scientific rigor behind it. But for this twin study, what they found is approximately only a third of the correlation between creativity is based on genetics, whereas about 70% of the correlation of intelligence is based on genetics. And what this suggests is there's a lot stronger link between nurture versus nature when it comes to people's creativity. Everyone out there is actually creative. Everyone has the ability to generate ideas. But what ends up happening is, as children grow into adults, two major things happen. One, their environment changes, and by that I mean what they are told is important in life changes. It goes from a situation where it's all about play and it's all about enjoying yourself, slowly to learning lessons, like you start learning facts. What's the alphabet? What are numbers? Then what are countries? Then what are capitals? And then you start getting assessed on those facts. You start getting tested. That then leads into university, where you start having to get graded, and then finally into your job, where your performance is assessed. It all starts teaching you about avoiding mistakes and therefore giving the right answer. That's an example of how nurture affects creativity. But as you go from a child to an adult, the parts of your brain involved in creativity also change. Predominantly, as you grow from a child into an adult, your prefrontal cortex, which is the most advanced organ in the universe, it's what gives humans their cognitive insight, their ability to have abstract thoughts, their risk awareness, their information processing ability. That starts developing. And amazingly enough, the more advanced parts of the brain start filtering out the more subconscious parts of the brain from having these ideas. So nurture is what's actually preventing a lot of people feeling creative, whereas in reality, everyone has the ability to be creative. Only about 30% of your creativity is determined by the genes you're born with. The vast majority of your creativity is determined on how you see the world and how you see yourself. And the other part of the flip side of that is, if you can change your mindset around creativity, even as an adult, you can change the way that you approach challenges, and you can make it easier for yourself to come up with ideas and become more creative. So that was one of the major amazing insights that I got.
That's really, I mean, that's a really fascinating, especially now that we're having the science now come up to support maybe the things that people have said in the past, but there was nothing really to kind of support it. It was kind of hard data to support it. So it sounds like as you've kind of gone into that research and you've kind of been able to kind of pull all these kind of threads together and seen the different things. I was a few weeks ago, I was with a friend of mine, Hugh MacLeod, who wrote a great book on creativity called Ignore Everybody. And it was fascinating because what you've just described there very eloquently about the process, what's actually kind of going on in the brain and the prefrontal cortex, he wrote about before, but he didn't explain it. And he's a cartoonist, he's an artist, so he didn't explain it from the what's going on in the brain. He explained it from the perspective of, kids before they go to school they'll often paint in the abstract, and they'll talk more if they'll talk more metaphoric, and then they're sitting there with crayons, all day, and then they go to school, and then in America they have this thing called the fourth grade slump, where you kind of see the creativity start to decline, and then obviously children becoming more conventional. We're taught to become more conventional. And then there's a second thing, which I think was really interesting, that Hughes talked about as well. And I've seen countless times as I've spoken at different events and conferences and retreats, when people kind of get to those times in their life, either those big birthdays or something happens, a major life moment, and they want to kind of reclaim that thing, either to start that new business or write that book or start doing music full time or whatever the thing is. It's as Hugh describes it, it's them basically saying, I want my crayons back. I want to get back to that thing. And what you were describing there about that prefrontal cortex, about how the development of it can sometimes inhibit things. You mentioned something right at the top of the show, which was talking about improvisational comedy. There's when you do comedy, does that kind of, you often think that's an extremely kind of creative thing to do, because it's a lot of kind of thoughts and things coming out without any kind of filters. Have you kind of done any study into what's kind of going on there when you're creating a show, when you're creating a performance?
Improvised comedy is probably one of the most extreme pieces of research you could possibly do, because it's all about several people being spontaneous together, and trying to get several people synchronized in brain scanners is probably beyond the scope of most people right now. But we do have an excellent piece of insight, which is one level down from that, which is improvised jazz and improvised hip hop. So another one of my favorite pieces of research is by Professor Charles Lim, who I think was at the Hoskins Library in the hospital in the US. I'll double check that one, but it's definitely Charles Lim who did the research. He's a keen jazz musician as well as academic, and he wanted to know what is allowing spontaneity to happen in people who are able to improvise. So he produced this mini keyboard that you can use when you're in a magnetic resonance imaging machine, which scans your brain. And he got some excellent jazz musicians into the brain scanner and started off by asking them to play a very famous piece of music, the sort of piece of music that anyone who studied music or even has an interest in music would be able to play in their sleep, super easy stuff. And he was scanning their brains, seeing what part of the brain was active while that was happening. Then he asked them to start improvising, starting to produce music that had never existed before. And he saw a very distinct change in the brain activity, specifically around one part of the prefrontal cortex called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. It's the part just behind your forehead, right at the front of your brain. And it's a very, very advanced, well, I say a highly evolved part of the human brain. It deals with several functions, but one of its most important functions is around inhibition. It's the part of the brain that inhibits you acting on other reflexes. So, for example, it's extremely active if you're in a job interview or meeting your in-laws for the first time or picking up the girl you like on your first date. It's all about you preventing yourself doing something really stupid. So it's all about preventing risk. And what it's doing is it's essentially figuring out what all the other thoughts are inside your brain, in your subconscious, and it's only letting certain thoughts come to the forefront. It's filtering out all of these other thoughts that might be a bit more risky. And what these jazz musicians had learned to do, partially through practice and partially through just the way they approach problems, was to make that part of the brain less active. So it was actually allowing these random ideas and random combinations of ideas in the subconscious part of the brain to finally come to light, shall I say. So if you're able to start being aware of how your brain is limiting itself and putting up this comfort barrier of only letting unrisky ideas come through, then you can start approaching the way you generate ideas in a completely new way as well.
That's fascinating kind of research. I think I saw a video. I think there may be a video on YouTube about it. So if I can find that video and then links to any of the research, I'll put it at jamestaylor.me on the show notes for this as well. And I definitely want to also have on the show notes the link to the article that you mentioned just kind of earlier about innovation and your conversations with all these different innovation experts. So just as we start to kind of finish up here as well, can you talk about, or just share with us a kind of personal habit that you think contributes to your success as a creativity consultant, but also gives you the ability to live a kind of happy and creative life?
Okay, there's a couple that spring to mind, but I know that usually having one silver nugget of information goes a lot further than 20 or 30 examples of other things. So what I would suggest is live in a way where you're constantly not just open to new experiences, but actively looking out new experiences. A lot of the advice that I give around how to increase your long-term creativity is around once a week seeking out a very new experience or giving yourself a new piece of knowledge that you didn't have before. So, for example, try a different type of restaurant. Go to an Ethiopian restaurant like I did over the weekend. I tried this lovely lentil and goat and cabbage type of food with this fermented bread. I've got no idea what it was called, but it was really lovely. And it gives you a new seed of information, of knowledge, that other pieces of knowledge in your brain can then form random combinations with. That's one reason why varied knowledge is so good for creativity. It essentially multiplies the types of combinations that your brain can come up with. But in addition to that, it also has some academic rigor behind it. A study was done in Holland around how creativity levels are affected if someone has just had an unexpected, new, varied experience. And it was done in Holland by getting students to prepare a sandwich in a new way. And essentially what had happened is students in Holland like chocolate sandwiches, apparently. And usually you take a piece of bread, you put butter on it, and then you put chocolate sprinkles on the top. And this is a very famous sandwich. But instead, students were given the instruction to put the butter on the bread, then sprinkle the chocolate sprinkles on a plate, turn the bread upside down with the butter downwards, press into the chocolate, and you get exactly the same sandwich at the end, but it's in a completely new way that the students hadn't expected. And what had happened after those students then went through a creativity test is just by doing that, they got a 14% increase in their creativity scores instantly, just because their brain was in a different state where it was more open to trying out new things and more varied things. So it's something I live by. I try and see new places, meet new people, read new articles, watch documentaries on subjects that I normally wouldn't have any interest in. All of those sorts of attitudes towards life, seeking out something that's slightly different, will help you with your overall creativity scores.
I mean, that's fascinating kind of study and research as well. And it's interesting because as you were talking about that, I'm suddenly reminded of Julia Cameron's The Artist Within, or the famous book she wrote on creativity, where she talked about this idea of having a weekly artist, I think she called it an artist date. I think that book was famous for two. One was Morning Pages, and the other one, I think it was called Artist Date, where you have a regular, basically time in your calendar where you kind of go and do something new, get a new experience. But what I find fascinating, what you've just spoken about there, is how the research is now kind of backing up what before was kind of written about, and people went, oh, well, that sounds interesting, that sounds like it could work, to now where we're actually kind of getting a little bit of kind of hard data on it as well. I think it's really fascinating developments that are going on there. Do you have an online resource or a tool or an app like Evernote that you absolutely love?
I love Evernote. I love Evernote. I use the web clipper functionality extensively, and most of my research is stored in Evernote. So I like reading stuff from all over the internet, and whenever I see something that gives me a new insight into either how an individual company is approaching innovation or how an individual is approaching the generation of their ideas, I clip it, write a couple of notes on it in a few seconds, tag it, and then it's saved for me forever.
Awesome. And if you could recommend just one book and one record, one album to our listeners, what would they be?
Oh, books, I've got so many. Records are a bit more tricky. So your audience is more focused on creativity. So there's I'll mention two, one on innovation, one on creativity. There's an excellent book on innovation called The 10 Types of Innovation, which was written by some management consultants in America at a company called Dublin. But they had done a very stringent data analysis on what types of ways of approaching innovation actually lead to success, whereas what sorts of approaches lead to failure. And they found certain correlations of why apparently 96% of ideas in companies never end up making a profit even after they're released. So that's one book I definitely recommend to your readers. As far as the creativity book goes, there's a good one by, I think it's Scott, probably the best one that I can think of, which has just popped into my head again, is called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's not actually a book about creativity per se. It's not about how artists approach problems, but it's more from my interest level, which is what's going on in the brain behind it. This book is about economics, but it actually has a lot of scientific studies in it about how the brain forms biases. And these biases are created when a brain goes through patterns repeatedly, until they become essentially the brain operating on autopilot. This is something that really inhibits people's creativity, especially in the workplace. They'll start seeing a problem that they approach every day in the same way, and they just go into autopilot and start executing it the same way again. Whereas if people want creativity, they need to break through those biases and break through those barriers and start approaching problems in a new way, an unexpected way, one that's actually a bit more risky because you don't know that it's going to work, but it might be better in the long term because it's going to give you a more adaptable, possibly more valuable solution. So those are the two that I'd recommend. As far as albums go, I'm not so sure about that. I like a lot of German techno, and at the same time, I like a lot of pop. So, nothing really springs to mind immediately.
But that book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a great book. And I think it's really fascinating how some of these things, talking about certain biases that we have developed for good reason, because our brain is trying to deal with this kind of cognitive load all the time, and just going with patterns seems like is the most obvious way, because it just kind of is efficient. It's
significantly more energy efficient, and it's significantly more likely to keep this human being from being dead.
Exactly.
So that's why it's evolved so efficiently.
Yeah. So which is fantastic how we sometimes have to just kind of break out of those things. So let's imagine if you woke up tomorrow morning and had to start from scratch. So all you have are the tools of your trade, I assume computer, laptop, and the knowledge that you've acquired over your years in learning about creativity and consulting, but you have no contacts, no one knows who you are. How would you restart?
How would I restart? I would start doing a lot of writing again. Probably this time focus more on video as well, which is one of my focuses for 2016. But I am the child of two teachers. I come from a family background where we lived in a school for a while. I very much believe in the power of teaching and getting knowledge out there to other people for them to use. So I would still focus, probably in a similar way to what I've done now, on getting the knowledge I have out there into the world, into the hands of people who can use it, and into the hands of businesses where I can add value for them. In some ways, I might actually have a leg up on the Nick Skillicorn of 3 years ago, who didn't have this big pool of knowledge to draw on. I didn't start off with contacts either. So I'd probably be able to forge a similar path, just avoiding the mistakes that I did previously. So write high quality stuff, produce videos, but this time always focus on what's in it for the people out there actually consuming the content. The individual who wants to learn about creativity, what can you do for them? What can you do to help them? Whether or not they become a client in the future is completely irrelevant. Information online is free, as it should be. And how can you help them change their perspective? So yeah, writing, video, podcasts like this, any way to get my message out there.
Awesome. Well, Nick, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. What's the best way that listeners can connect with you, learn more about your different projects that you have going?
The best way to do it is to register yourself for a free account at ideatovalue.com. That's idea to value with the word TO, not with the number 2. And with that, you get access to a whole slew of free research, free video content about how creativity works, how innovation works. And also, what's become quite popular recently is I've got a 1-month creativity training program that takes you through the 5 main activities that you need to do every day, every week, every month. Just simple little things to help your creativity not only become quicker during that day, but also be enhanced over time as well. So you can get all of that for free with a free account at ideatovalue.com.
Awesome. I'll put all the links here on the show notes. People go to jamestaylor.me, just type in Nick Skillicorn and you'll find all the show notes that we've just been talking about today. Well, Nick, thank you so much. I wish you all the best
you too.
In the future as you build Idea to Value and you build your business as well. And look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Absolutely. Cheers. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, James Taylor here again. And if you're interested in living a more creative life, then I'd love to invite you to join me as I share some of the most successful strategies and techniques that high-performing creatives use. I put them all together in a free downloadable ebook that you can get by going to jamestaylor.me. That's jamestaylor.me to get your free downloadable ebook on creativity.